The white coat is supposed to symbolize healing. A doctor's office is meant to be the safest place you'll ever walk into. But sometimes, behind that coat isn't a healer. It's a predator. Across the world, patients have been betrayed in the worst ways imaginable. Murder disguised as medicine. Fraud so ruthless it poisoned healthy. Abuse carried out under the false cover of care. These are the stories of doctors who traded hospitals for handcuffs and operating rooms for prison cells. Today, we're counting down the 10 most notorious doctors whose crimes shattered public trust and proved that even those sworn to protect life can become its greatest threat. If you're new here, subscribe now, because the cases we uncover show how trust in medicine can turn deadly. And you don't want to miss the next story. Doctor number 10, Harold Shipman. In the quiet English town of Hyde, Dr. Harold Shipman was the picture of trust. A caring family doctor, beloved by elderly patients, always ready to make house calls. For over 2 decades, he was the man people invited into their homes at their most vulnerable moments. But behind that trusted image was the deadliest doctor in modern history. Shipman's method was chillingly simple. He injected patients, mostly elderly women, with lethal doses of diamorphine, a medical-grade form of heroin. Then, as their lives slipped away, he falsified medical records to make it look like natural causes. For years, no one questioned him. After all, who would suspect a family doctor? But suspicions grew when local undertakers noticed an unusually high number of deaths among Shipman's patients. The final crack came in 1998, when the daughter of one victim, Kathleen Grundy, discovered a forge while leaving everything to Shipman. A police investigation followed. Exhumations revealed his patients' bodies were filled with diamorphine. A public inquiry later confirmed what no one wanted to believe. Shipman had murdered at least 218 patients, with a true number likely closer to 260. In 2000, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a recommendation he never be released. For years later, Harold Shipman hanged himself in his prison cell. He remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the deadliest killers are the ones we trust the most. Doctor number 9, Michael Swango. But Shipman wasn't the only doctor hiding death behind respectability. Across the Atlantic, another physician was writing his own deadly chapter. Michael Swango looked like the ideal doctor, a former U.S. Marine, intelligent, ambitious, and always carrying a notebook. But those notebooks didn't just contain medical notes. They were filled with detailed accounts of disasters, poisonings, and violent deaths. His obsession soon turned deadly. In the 1980s, during his training at Ohio State University, patients on his ward suddenly collapsed. Seizures, breathing failure. Some died. Nurses noticed a pattern. It always happened on Swango's shift. One even caught him injecting something into an IV bag. But without hard proof, he walked free. After being forced out of Ohio State, he reinvented himself as a paramedic in Illinois. There, he poisoned his colleagues with donuts and tea laced with arsenic. Several became violently ill. This time, he was caught, convicted of poisoning, and sent to prison, but served just 2 years. When he got out, unbelievably, Swango managed to hide his past and get new medical jobs. In South Dakota, in New York, even in Zimbabwe. Everywhere he worked, patients mysteriously died. Local staff in Africa nicknamed him Dr. Death. The FBI finally caught him in 1997, just as he was about to board a flight to Saudi Arabia for another medical job. He was first charged with fraud, but investigators slowly built the murder cases. In 2000, Swango admitted to 4 murders and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Even today, he is suspected of killing up to 60 patients worldwide. Doctor number 8, Farid Fata. While Swango used poison and deception, another doctor turned an even more devastating weapon against his patients: false hope. Imagine going to the doctor and being told you have cancer. Your life stops. You brace yourself for the fight of your life. You put everything, your body, your money, your future, in your doctor's hands. That was the nightmare Dr. Farid Fata created. Fata was one of Michigan's most prominent oncologists. He ran 7 clinics, had thousands of patients, and looked like a miracle worker. But behind a polished image was pure fraud. His scam was simple and horrifying. He diagnosed healthy people with cancer and then put them through years of brutal chemotherapy they didn't need. Chemo is poison meant to kill cancer cells, but it also destroys the immune system, weakens bones, and wrecks organs. Patients who were perfectly healthy lost their teeth, developed heart problems, and suffered agonizing side effects. All for profit. Why? Because every treatment meant money. Medicare and insurers paid millions for each drip, each injection. Fata billed more than $17 million in false claims. The whistleblower wasn't a doctor. It was his office manager who saw the fraud and went to the FBI. When agents raided his clinics in 2013, they uncovered more than 500 victims. In 2015, Fata pleaded guilty. The judge called his crimes a huge, horrific series of acts and sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison. He'll never practice medicine again. For many, he stole not just money, but years of health, hope, and dignity. Doctor number 7, Kermit Gosnell. From fake cures to a clinic of horrors. The next case shows how medicine itself can be twisted into cruelty. In Philadelphia, Dr. Kermit Gosnell ran what he called the Women's Medical Society. To the outside world, it looked like a clinic for poor women who couldn't afford care elsewhere. Inside, it was something closer to a horror movie. The clinic was filthy, blood on the floors, cats roaming the halls, rusty, broken equipment. But that was only the surface. Gosnell specialized in illegal late-term abortions, procedures beyond Pennsylvania's legal limit of 24 weeks. What shocked investigators most was how he handled cases where the baby was delivered alive. Staff testified that Gosnell would take scissors and snip the spinal cord of infants, killing them on the spot. He even kept jars of severed baby feet as specimens. Patients weren't safe either. In 2009, Karnamaya Mungar, a 41-year-old refugee, died after being overdosed with sedatives from Gosnell's untrained staff. The clinic had no functioning emergency equipment, and no one knew CPR. The law finally caught up in 2010, not because of his abortions, but because the DA raided the clinic for running a massive prescription pill mill. What they found inside led to one of the most shocking medical crime trials in U.S. history. In 2013, Gosnell was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder for killing babies born alive, plus involuntary manslaughter in Mungar's death. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His case was called the House of Horrors, a chilling example of how a doctor can turn a clinic into a slaughterhouse when oversight fails. Doctor number 6, Robert Haddon. If Gosnell exploited women under guise of treatment, the next case proves how institutional silence can protect predators in plain sight. He was a respected obstetrician-gynecologist in New York City. Columbia University and New York Presbyterian Hospital trusted him with the care of thousands of women, including expectant mothers. For decades, Dr. Robert Haddon's name carried prestige. But behind the exam room door, Haddon was a predator under the guise of routine checkups. He sexually abused patients, sometimes during pregnancy visits, sometimes over repeated appointments. Many were young, vulnerable, and convinced the behavior was medical. Whispers and complaints surfaced as early as the 1990s. But each time, the system protected him. Hospital leaders minimized reports. Disciplinary boards issued warnings instead of bans. Columbia even apologized in writing for his behavior, but allowed him to keep seeing patients. The truth finally came out when survivors, including Evelyn Young, the wife of U.S. presidential candidate Andrew Young, spoke publicly. Their testimonies unleashed a flood of other victims, shattering years of institutional silence. In 2023, Haddon was convicted on federal charges of enticing patients to cross state lines for abuse. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Columbia later agreed to a staggering $750 million settlement with hundreds of victims, one of the largest payouts ever in a sexual abuse case tied to a university. This case wasn't just about one predator in a white coat. It was about an entire system that looked away while women were harmed. If you've made it this far, you can see how each case gets darker. Which one has shocked you the most so far? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because the next 5 stories are even more disturbing. Doctor number 5, Christopher Duntsch. Now, from a predator in the exam room to a surgeon in Texas, whose patients called him Dr. Death. Christopher Duntsch arrived in Texas with dazzling credentials. He claimed an MD and PhD, cutting-edge spine surgery training, and a promise to cure crippling back pain. To patients, he was charismatic, confident, and offered hope. Hospitals in Dallas rushed to bring him on. But in the operating room, Duntsch was not a healer. He was a butcher. Colleagues described surgeries where he cut into the wrong part of the spine, severed arteries, drilled screws into muscle instead of bone, and left instruments inside patients. The results were catastrophic. Out of 38 patients, 33 were left permanently disabled. 2 were killed. One woman woke up unable to speak above a whisper. Another, his own childhood friend, was left a quadriplegic. Nurses and fellow surgeons were horrified. One even had to physically pull instruments out of his hands mid-surgery to stop him from doing more damage. And yet, hospital after hospital quietly let him go rather than report him. Instead of stopping him, the system passed him on. It took the relentless efforts of 2 Dallas surgeons, Dr. Robert Henderson and Dr. Randall Kirby, to bring him down. They exposed his record to the Texas Medical Board, who finally suspended his license. Prosecutors then did something almost unheard of. They charged a surgeon with aggravated assault for botched operations. In 2017, a jury found Duntsch guilty of maiming 74-year-old patient Mary Efford. He was sentenced to life in prison. Today, he is locked away in the Texas prison system, the first American surgeon to receive such a punishment. Christopher Duntsch wasn't just incompetent. He was reckless, arrogant, and, as many believe, cruel on purpose. His story raises one of the darkest questions in medicine. Was he simply unskilled, or did he enjoy playing God with people's lives? Doctor number 4, Reynaldo Ortiz. Duntsch left patients permanently disabled. But the next doctor didn't just harm through incompetence. His acts were deliberate sabotage. In 2022, patients at Baylor Scott and White Surgical Center in Dallas began experiencing sudden, unexplained medical crises during routine surgeries. Healthy patients went into cardiac arrest. One even died on the table. At first, no one could explain it. But behind the scenes, a disturbing pattern was emerging. The common link was Dr. Reynaldo Ortiz, an anesthesiologist with a long history of complaints and disciplinary actions. He wasn't just administering anesthesia. He was tampering with IV bags. Surveillance footage eventually revealed the chilling truth. Ortiz was caught on camera slipping syringes into IV bags, then quickly placing them back in storage for unsuspecting colleagues and patients. Inside those bags, potentially lethal doses of nerve-blocking drugs. The sabotage didn't just harm patients. One nurse, who used one of the tainted IV bags during her own procedure, died. Dozens of others suffered life-threatening complications. Investigators believe Ortiz's motive was revenge, retaliation after being disciplined by hospital leadership. By targeting IV bags, he turned every surgery into Russian roulette. In 2023, Ortiz was arrested and charged with tampering with consumer products resulting in death, as well as intentional adulteration. He was convicted in federal court and, in 2024, sentenced to life in prison without parole. His case shocked the medical community because this wasn't malpractice or negligence. It was deliberate, calculated sabotage inside the operating room. Doctor number 3, Robert Morris Levy. While Ortiz poisoned IV bag, another doctor destroyed lives through the silent power of a microscope. At the Veterans Healthcare System of the Ozarks in Fayetteville, Arkansas, thousands of veterans placed their lives in the hands of one man. Dr. Robert Morris Levy. He was the chief pathologist, the doctor responsible for examining tissue samples under a microscope to confirm diseases like cancer. In other words, his word could mean the difference between life-saving treatment or a death sentence. But behind his credentials, Levy was hiding a dangerous secret. He was often drunk or high on a synthetic alcohol substitute called 2M2B, a chemical that produces effects similar to vodka, but is harder to detect in drug tests. He would show up to work impaired, making critical diagnostic errors that would go unnoticed for years. By 2018, an internal review revealed the staggering scale of the damage. Over 3,000 diagnostic mistakes were traced to Levy. Some patients were falsely told they had cancer and underwent unnecessary chemotherapy. Others were reassured their samples were normal, only to later die from undiagnosed, aggressive diseases. At least 15 veteran deaths were directly linked to his negligence. Investigators discovered Levy went to great lengths to cover his tracks. He altered lab results. He submitted synthetic urine to avoid detection in drug screenings. He falsified records. One whistleblower finally raised the alarm, prompting a massive review of more than 34,000 cases he had handled during his tenure. The findings were devastating. Families describe how their loved ones were robbed of time, misled by false diagnoses, and subjected to painful treatments that were never necessary. Prosecutors built a case not just on his incompetence, but on his deliberate deception. In 2019, Dr. Levy was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and involuntary manslaughter. In 2021, he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison and ordered to pay nearly $500,000 in restitution. The judge called his actions a betrayal of trust that cost veterans their lives. His case forced the Department of Veterans Affairs to overhaul its oversight systems, adding stricter safeguards so that one impaired doctor could never again inflict this much harm unchecked. Doctor number 2, Moses D. Graff Johnson. From diagnostic fraud to surgical fraud, our next case exposes how one man carved out millions through unnecessary procedures. Dr. Moses D. Graff Johnson had all the makings of a success story. A Ghanaian-American cardiovascular surgeon, he was once celebrated for his skill in performing complex heart procedures. He even gained attention for reportedly saving rapper 50 Cent's life after the artist was shot multiple times in 2000. But years later, Johnson's name would resurface, this time in one of the largest medical fraud scandals in U.S. history. Operating out of the Heart and Vascular Institute of North Florida in Tallahassee, Johnson presented himself as a community savior. He forged ties with local churches, nursing homes, and hospitals, gaining trust from some of the area's most vulnerable patients. They believed he was there to heal. Instead, he was there to exploit. Between 2015 and 2020, Johnson performed hundreds of unnecessary procedures, including diagnostic angiographies and atherectomies, invasive operations where instruments are threaded through blood vessels to scrape out supposed blockages. But many of these patients didn't need surgery at all. In some cases, records show their arteries were normal, yet Johnson falsified reports to justify billing insurers. The fraud was staggering. He billed Medicare and private insurers for nearly $29 million, using the money to bankroll a lavish lifestyle, luxury cars, expensive jewelry, multiple homes in New York, Miami, and Houston, and even business ventures back in Ghana, including a restaurant and a clinic. Federal agents finally caught up with him in February 2020. A raid on his office uncovered thousands in cash, firearms, and records of fraudulent claims. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Johnson pleaded guilty. In 2021, he was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and ordered to pay more than $28 million in restitution. His patients, however, were left with permanent scars. Many endured painful and dangerous procedures they never needed. Others were left to question whether their diagnoses had ever been real. Johnson's downfall wasn't just about stolen money. It was about the betrayal of a community that trusted him with their lives. Doctor number 1, David M. Young. And finally, Not all betrayal happens in the operating room. Sometimes it happens from behind a computer screen. Dr. David M. Young wasn't the kind of doctor patients ever met in person. From his office in Texas, he was supposed to provide telemedicine consultations, remote evaluations that could help people in rural areas get medical care. But instead of caring for patients, Young turned telemedicine into a $70 million fraud empire. Between 2015 and 2020, Young signed off on thousands of orders for orthopedic braces, knee, back, and wrist supports, and for cancer genetic testing kits. The problem? He approved them without ever speaking to the patients, let alone examining them. These prescriptions were then funneled through shady supply companies and labs that billed Medicare, the U.S. government's health insurance program for seniors and the disabled. On paper, the claims look legitimate. In reality, many of the patients didn't need the equipment or tests at all. To Medicare, it was a massive fraud. To patients, it was confusion and betrayal. Some received braces they never ordered. Others had false medical records created in their names. Paperwork that could impact future medical decisions. Young personally pocketed nearly $500,000 for his role in the scheme. But when federal investigators closed in, the scale of the fraud shocked even seasoned prosecutors. 13,000 Medicare beneficiaries affected. Tens of millions in false claims. Taxpayer money funneled into bogus treatments. In 2025, a federal jury convicted Young of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and making false statements related to patient care. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and ordered to pay more than $26 million in restitution. The case was part of a broader crackdown on telemedicine fraud across the U.S. But for many, it raised a chilling question. If a doctor could bill millions for patients he never saw, how many other scams might still be flying under the radar? These 10 cases reveal something chilling. The white coat isn't always a symbol of trust. Behind hospital walls and private offices, some doctors use their training not to heal, but to harm. From fraud schemes that stole millions to surgeries that should never have happened to abuse hidden behind closed doors. These crimes shattered families, destroyed trust, and left scars that will never fully heal. But every sentence handed down, every conviction, is also a warning. Patients must never stop asking questions, never stop demanding accountability. Because when medicine turns criminal, the cost is always human life. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these cases shocked you the most? And do you think the punishments fit the crimes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe more people need to see what really happens when doctors betray their oath, share this video. Finally, subscribe to Medical Crime Files and turn on notifications, because the next case might just change the way you look at healthcare forever.